Chapter 10. "Good morning, O wise one," Blaine said, striding into the break room Saturday morning. He was scheduled for a full-day shift, but for once in the longest time, he felt truly up to the task. Eve hiked her eyebrows at him. "You sound happy." "Huh, wouldn't know why." He grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down next to her. "First, I have to say thanks for yesterday. I know you didn't have to be that honest with me, but I'm glad you were." There was a small, hopeful smile. "So you're not mad at me forever?" "Mad? No." He spun the coffee and leaned forward. "Well, okay, I was, but let's just say I kind of got a sign that you were right." He glanced at her, and she looked intrigued. "So I'm kind of wondering what else you've got." "What else?" "Yeah, I mean, how do you go about figuring out what's really important, like you said yesterday?" She surveyed him for a long moment, then took a breath and lowered her gaze even further. It took a long minute for her to gather the courage to say the words that were making Blaine more nervous with each passing second. Finally, she laid her wrists on the table and let her gaze fall to them. "Do you believe in God?" "In God?" The question pushed him backward. "Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, we used to go to church and stuff. Why?" He took a sip of coffee, watching her with trepidation. "Well, in my experience," she said slowly, "figuring out what's important has been about learning what's important to God and then making those things important in my life and in how I live." "Okay, explain that." It seemed that she was going deeper into herself each time she tried to answer. "Well, like honesty. Honesty is important to God, so making it important in my life has given me the chance to have conversations like this. It's not that I ask for them or that I seek them out. They just show up. And then I can take the piece I've found and help somebody else find it too." Blaine was nodding, not so much because he understood, but because he was absorbing what she was saying. "I can't explain it exactly," Eve said, her gaze bouncing only intermittently from her fingernails to him. "But the more I get in line with what God says is important, the more peace I have, and the more peace I can help others get to." "And you figure out what God thinks is important, how?" Eve's gaze chanced up to the clock, and she stood quickly. "Time to get cracking." He followed her up. "You didn't answer my question." "I will." Thinking was becoming truly annoying. No matter how hard Melody tried not to think about Blaine and Lana standing there together, the thoughts were going nowhere. It was frustrating because when she pulled her biology book out to study, she thought about him. When she went to work, she thought about him, there with Dylan, and then with Farron. That thought was even more infuriating. Farron was now going with some guy named Caleb. He showed up, called, and generally hung on Farron's every move and word. They were sickening. It didn't help that Farron made a point of sharing the intimate details of every date they had during lunch break, or afternoon break, or any other time she happened to be around. Like Melody really wanted to hear about that. She was still going to the gym and eating next to nothing, but the pounds were stubborn and they were wearing her willpower out. It would have been different if she could have seen any progress either in her body or in her love life, but both seemed stuck on perpetual hopelessness. On Tuesday night, she was an hour from closing when a guy walked in. "Hi there, I'm looking for some work boots." "Okay," Melody said from her position at the counter. "They are over there in the very back." "Thanks," he said, and ambled in the direction she had indicated. Going through the pre-closing checklist, she restocked the bags at the front and went to straighten the purses. "Melody," Nathan said from behind her. She turned slightly. "Yeah?" "Listen, I've got to run get something for Nancy. Tomorrow's our anniversary, and I've got nothing. Do you mind closing up? I really don't think we're going to have a flood of customers in the next hour." "Oh, okay, sure." "Awesome. I knew I could count on you." And with that, he went to the back. It was several more minutes of straightening when she realized the man was back with a box in hand. "Are you ready, sir?" "Found something?" He held up the box, his dark hair brushing his shoulders when he did so. Melody smiled as she walked to the cash register. However, once there, the center of her chest squeezed shut as she took a real look at him. Haggard and sun-hardened, his blue plaid shirt looked at least a size too big. She punched her code into the register and opened the shoebox. Pulling the first boot up, she checked the size and ran the tag remover over the little gray piece of plastic to remove it. It was only when she pulled the second boot up that she knew she had a problem. Worry coursed through her as she retrieved the first boot and rechecked the size. They were, in fact, different. She ran through her options, but none of them were very good. I'm sorry, sir. These sizes are different." "Huh?" "The sizes are different. This one's a 10, this one's an 11. "Is that a problem?" He leaned on the counter with both elbows to see what she was showing him. His dark eyes struck a chord of fear in her. "Well, we can't sell two different sizes. It makes it impossible to sell the other pair." "Oh, well." He straightened with a nice smile. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize that would be a problem." "Yeah, well..." She checked the box and put only the correct boot in it. "It's company policy. You can go back and get the match of either one if you want." He seemed to consider that. "You know, maybe I don't need them boots as much as I thought." It was strange that although he gave her no indication of anything other than being a nice guy, it was all she could do to maintain her composure. "I'm really sorry, sir." "No, don't worry about it. I'll just..." He pointed to the door, and she nodded, feeling absurdly glad he was leaving and wishing he would already. "Have a good evening." His smile slid through her. "Oh, I will." She watched him walk all the way out to his pickup truck, get in, and drive away. Breathing, she checked her watch. 30 minutes to go. She wished she hadn't told Nathan he could leave. Something about the man in the pickup truck gave her the creeps. After 10 agonizing minutes of alternately checking the front windows and telling herself she was being ridiculous, the jingle of the front doors brought Melody's attention to it. Utter terror smashed into her when she glanced around the shelf where she was straightening shoes. There wasn't another customer in the store, and very few even out on the sidewalks. Pulling Just Be Cool to her, she stepped around the shelving. "Oh, hello, sir. Is there something else?" The man with the dark eyes and long hair stood gazing at her. "I just wanted to come back and say I'm sorry about before, with them boots. I shouldn't have tried to pull that one on you." "Oh, well, that's all right." Her hand straightened the shelf of shoe boxes automatically. She tried to look unfazed and nonchalant, but her heart was pounding like a speaker about to blow. "Don't worry about it. It happens a lot." "I know." He started toward her, which hammered her heart even harder. "But you seem such a nice young thing. I'd hate to think I put you in an awkward position." "Oh, no, you didn't. It's okay." He ambled to her closer and closer. "Well, I don't want you getting in trouble over me being stupid." The fact that she was behind the shelving and not in view of anyone outside got her feet moving. Melody hurried to the front counter, crossing past him, but far enough away to avoid a reach if he tried something. He followed her. She could feel it. At the front counter, she felt only barely safer. Licking her parched lips, she bent down and pulled the box of shoelaces up to sort them. Is there something else?" Without ever taking his gaze off of her, he leaned onto the counter between them. "You sure are nice." His glance took in the name tag pinned to her chest. Melody. His gaze came back up to her face. "That's a nice name. I guess you're really into music." "Music? Oh, no, not really." Her hands were shaking, and she fought to simultaneously get them to stop and to think through the situation. What if he didn't leave? What was the best way out of this situation? "So you're not into that hip-hop crap all the kids are into these days, then?" "Oh, no. Don't listen to much of that." The shoelaces were done. She set them to the side and turned to him, forcing her voice to sound normal. Did you want to try on something different? Some other kind of boots or something?" "Nah." His smile slithered through her. I've just been out driving all day and thought I'd stop and talk with this nice sales girl I met a while ago. You don't mind, do you?" What was the correct answer to that? No. She looked around the store, seeing all the things that needed done, but they all would necessitate her leaving the window, and leaving that window could be deadly. "But I'm about to close, and I really need to be getting home." "Oh." He straightened. "Well, that's okay. Maybe I can just stick around and walk you to your car." The Bible Eve had given Blaine lay in the passenger seat as he drove home on Tuesday night. He smiled again that she had done that. She didn't have to. He could have bought his own. Some second-hand bookstore had to have one. Yet here was this one. Nice. New. A gift from a friend. It was strange what a small shift of events had done for his head and for his heart. Being honest. One moment of just being who he really was, and life had altered itself around that decision, realigning itself around that one simple act. His gaze went out the window as it normally did on this trek home. Galaxy shoes in neon letters shone out in the fading light. He wondered if Melody was there. There was no telling what her schedule was. He'd never bothered to ask. But the Bible called to his soul. Be honest. This is a place to start. Glancing at the clock, he knew it was closing time. She probably wasn't there anyway. He redirected his gaze to the street in front of him. Don't drive on by. Stop, Blaine. Talk to her. This is living what's important. Doing what needs to be done in the moment you think about it. Rationally, it made no sense, but his heart wasn't listening to rational anymore. She deserved better than he had treated her. True, she probably didn't ever want to see him again, but if he was going to start being honest, this was one place that would have to be addressed. Sighing at the absurdity of the action, he spun Lillian into the strip mall parking lot. "I'm sorry, sir," Melody said, forcing herself not to panic. "It's time for me to close." "What's this sir business? You can call me Cal." Cal." She walked to the front doors, knowing he wasn't leaving, but not knowing how to summon help. "Really, I need to lock up now." The look in his eyes struck fear into the center of her. Breathing hurt. "I told you I could help. I'd hate for you to be here all by yourself. The city's a dangerous place, you know, especially at night. You don't know what crazies might be out there." She didn't know about out there, but she was pretty sure in here wasn't very safe. "I appreciate it, but I can't let customers stay in here while I lock up. It's policy, you know?" His grin was at once frightening and friendly. "But we were just getting to know each other. Surely that's not a crime, is it?" The moment his hand touched her arm, sheer terror clutched her. Not wanting to rile him, she fought not to shake him off. "Really, you need to go now." "You don't really want me to go, now do you?" He was inches from her and closing fast. The front door came open so suddenly, Melody hadn't even realized anyone was on the other side of it. Her gaze jerked to it as the overwhelming fear cascaded over her. "Blaine!" It wasn't really a question or a statement, more a cry for help. "What do you think you're doing?" Blaine demanded, staring holes through Cal, who dropped his arm and backed up a step. "Shop's closed, buddy," Cal said menacingly. "Melody was just about to lock up for the night." She couldn't get even a single word out through the fear. Her gaze locked with Blaine's, and without saying anything, she told him everything. His gaze turned to Cal, a look of solid resolve etched on his face. "It's time for the lady to lock up. That means it's time for you to go." "I was going to walk her to her car," Cal countered. "Yeah, I'm sure." He glanced at her. "Mel, do you know the number for mall security?" Yeah." Stumbling through the terror jamming all the rational signals in her brain, Melody barely got the words into the air as she stared at him, not really comprehending anything. "Good," Blaine said, staring only at Cal. "Call it." Oh, okay." She turned for the counter, wondering how it had gotten so very far away. Cal waited one more second, ready to call Blaine's bluff, but the younger man never so much as blinked. Finally, Cal backed away, circling Blaine toward the door. Hey, man, no need. I'm out of here. He slid past Blaine and pushed out the door. I'll see you later, Melody. When she turned, it was all she could do not to faint. It was as if the whole world had narrowed to that one face, that 1 second. And then he was gone. Blaine grabbed the shiny silver door handle. Get the keys, Mel. Lock the door. But she couldn't move. Tears, fear, horror, and shock mixed, spinning her world into the depths of nothingness. Mel, Blaine commanded. Keys, now. Shaking her head and swallowing hard, she pulled the keys from her pocket and stepped to his side. The lock clicked just as Cal drove away in the pickup. Every scenario that could have happened had Blaine not picked that moment to show up, plummeted through her consciousness. Oh my... what? Why? Tears jumped through the breaths she wasn't taking, and she collapsed into them just as Blaine's arms came around her. Moans and sobs were all she could get out as she clung to him. Strong and solid, he held her, stroking her hair and shushing her sobs. After time no longer mattered anymore, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. Serious, overwhelming concern streamed from his eyes. He didn't let go of her. Instead, he put his hands on her shoulders. You okay? She nodded, but there was no belief anywhere behind it. Sniffing back the tears, she forced air into her lungs as her gaze went back out the window. He was gone, but it was impossible not to see him still standing there. Terror ripped through her. I've got to get home. Mom's going to be panicking. Someone was panicking, but it wasn't her mother. Still, she had to find a way to get it together so he wouldn't know how totally freaked out she was. Timidly, she looked up at him. Could you wait? Soft compassion drifted into his eyes. As long as you need. When they walked together into the parking lot some 30 minutes later, Blaine sensed her checking, glancing around, looking for him. Cal, the idiot who had scared her out of her mind. He wished he knew how to calm her, but there wasn't much he could do. The sparkle and fun were gone from her eyes. I know it's out of your way and everything. He reached over and put his arm around her protectively. Do you want me to follow you home? The nodding was 3 quick movements. I'm sorry, that guy just... Resolve to protect her from all the Cals of the world rose in him. Hey. He turned to her, stopping in the middle of the near-empty lot. Lowering his gaze to look at her, he settled the feelings with a breath. I've got your back, okay? I'm not going to let anything happen. Her gaze held his for only a moment, and then it fell to her feet as she nodded again. Carefully, he turned her to her car where he took the keys from her shaking hands. If there was a way he could have driven her home, he would have, but that was a logistical nightmare. Then, just before he closed her door, he remembered. I'm in my... He pointed across the lot at the little green car. She took one look, and whatever he'd expected to happen didn't. Instead, she only nodded. He didn't want to make the next request, but he had no choice. Make sure I get it started, okay? Again, she nodded. He hated that. He wanted words, actual words. But she had said so few of them, he knew that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. He closed her door and jogged over to his car. The questions of how easily she'd accepted the car crowded into him, but he pushed them down. Take care of her now. The rest can wait. He got the door opened with only 2 yanks, jumped behind the wheel, and, saying a prayer, hit the starter. It cranked and then started up. Thank you, God, he said to the car ceiling. Quickly, he backed out and watched her do the same. The traffic was relatively light, and all the way to her house, he said prayer after prayer for her and thanking God that he'd heeded that voice in his head. He was determined not to go down the road of what if he hadn't. That was too horrible to contemplate. Dear Lord, I know you don't know me too well, but please be with Melody. She needs you, Lord. She's terrified right now. That guy is an idiot. Help her drive safely, Lord, please. The drive home was a haze of red taillights and inky black darkness. Her hands shook so badly, Melody had to sit on one to get it to stop. The breaths came in gasps, and she fought the tears the entire trip. Every third second, she glanced in her mirror to make sure Blaine was still there. He was. Those little headlights stayed right there. By the time she pulled to the curb of her house, her breathing had almost returned to normal, although she had a pounding headache. She killed the engine and grabbed her purse off the seat. She had just stood from the car when the little headlights blinked off behind her. In less than 10 seconds, he was at her side. Instead of peppering her with questions and his concern, after one compassionate look, he chose to simply turn with her. 6 steps, and he put his arm around her. Melody knew all about his history and why she should tell him to get lost, but the truth was, right then, she needed him, and he was here. Feeling the relief and gratefulness for that simple fact, she laid her head on his shoulder. Together, they walked into the front yard where the little bench swing stood. It wasn't a plan, but her feet angled them over to it, and he followed as if he knew that's where they were headed. At the swing, he sat down, steadied it for her, and collected her into his arms when she sat. Shock gave way to fatigue, and she closed her eyes, letting the horror and the what-ifs drop away. For his part, Blaine simply pushed the swing slowly with his toe. Neither moved beyond that. It was strange to her how comfortable this felt, like he wasn't embarrassed to be sitting in a front yard that wasn't even watered properly. The little sprinkler sat out front, the top arm of it leaned like an abandoned seesaw. The house was less than spectacular. They didn't even have a swimming pool or a maid or 6 TV sets. And yet, he was here, holding her as if that made perfect sense. One small part of her wanted to ask, to voice every question and concern in her, but the rest of her simply wanted to believe that somehow this could actually be happening. As absurd and ridiculous as that sounded, it was all she wanted from this moment. She never asked, never so much as broached the subject of his ugly car and how he'd come to show up for no reason at just the right moment. That was okay with Blaine. Somehow in the silence, surrounded only by the soft hum of traffic, he didn't want to think about any of that, only that she was here and she was safe. He laid his head over on hers and closed his eyes. He liked how she smelled, all flowers and spices. It fit her. The soft fall of golden blonde hair caressed his cheek, and he let it with no qualms. She wasn't moving, so neither would he. How long they sat like that, he didn't really know, but after late evening turned into night, she sighed and pulled up from his embrace. His arms immediately felt empty. Instead of letting her go, he let his hand drop so that it rubbed up and down her back. She leaned forward, putting her elbows on her knees and arching her back into his touch. A moment, and she flipped her hair back with both hands and turned to look at him. "Thank you." His smile was soft and compassionate. "You're welcome." As she stood, his gaze followed her up. She stood there on the lawn, 3 feet in front of him, and stretched. He still liked the way her periwinkle polo shirt looked on her, even in the dim light. Pert nose, shiny but tired eyes, she looked at him, and for all the words that should have been there, he could find none of them. "You need to get home," she said, her gaze never leaving his face. Blaine stood and stepped toward her. His hands came up to cup around her arms, and he lowered his gaze at her. "Are you going to be all right?" She let her head go back slowly, as if contemplating which way to move it. Then, slowly, it came forward. The next 3 short nods came just faster. "Yeah." With that, it was time to leave. He knew it, but nothing in him wanted to. "Will I see you tomorrow night? At school?" Her smile was barely there, and then grew slightly. "Yeah." Although it's all he wanted to do, kissing her now would be wrong. She'd just been through a terrible experience, and to take advantage of a vulnerable moment like this was a move reserved for scumbags and jerks, both of which he'd decided never to be again. It wasn't easy when he pulled her to him for one more hug to not seal his concern for her with a kiss, but he pulled away and gazed at her seriously. "You would tell me if you weren't okay, right?" This smile was brighter, and a spark of the light in her eyes came fired to life. "Yes, I would tell you." "Good, because I'm here, and I care, okay?" Gazing at him, she nodded. "Okay, just so we're clear on that." Clear on that. Melody had thought about those words 1,000,000 times. The fact that he was her friend was abundantly clear. What wasn't as clear was what she should do with these feelings of wanting him to hold her forever. Friends didn't do that kind of thing after all. Friends get together for drinks and to watch baseball games. Friends don't kiss in the moonlight and whisper sweet nothings in each other's ear. But those were the things she wanted to do with Blaine. How she would ever pretend they weren't was beyond her. When she crawled into bed, fear from earlier tried to get in, but she shut it out with the memory of him holding her. That memory would be with her forever. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.